goes to Christopher Nolan for Memento.
In 2002, Christopher Nolan was beginning his ascent from an exciting, independent, low-budget filmmaker, collecting award after award on the festival circuit, to a director whose name would become synonymous with intelligent, big-screen escapism. His films would continually go on to reward audience concentration with a technical ferocity previously unseen in mainstream cinema. Each subsequent release would be, and still is, preempted by months and even years of anticipation, teaser trailers, and endless fan speculation. On the eve of the premiere to Insomnia, Nolan's first studio picture, starring Al Pacino and Robin Williams, the director was asked what was next. Nolan replied, "I'm doing a film about the life of Howard Hughes. Jim Carrey will play the role. It will have strong connections with the films I've already made."
I'm getting into the Howard Hughes story.
I just saw that today. Go ahead and tell us about that in a second.
Yeah, we just secured the biography by Richard Hack, and it's just such a tremendous story, and it pertains to this in the idea that it's an old C.S. Lewis book. You ever read the Screw Tape Letters?
Oh, yes, right.
Well, one of the correspondence between the demon in hell and the minion on earth is the minion is trying to corrupt the human soul. And he sends a letter to Screwtape saying, "We've won. He's joined the army. He's going to fight on the front lines." And Screwtape says, "You fool! Don't you know that it takes a whole life to corrupt the human soul?" And there's so much of that kind of working in my work now and in my life. I'm so conscious of that. I'm so conscious of, the Howard Hughes story is fascinating, because at what point did he go too far?
Yeah.
Seen Memento, and I just loved it. I just thought that was such an original approach, and just terrific. And we were talking about Howard Hughes, and I was very interested in doing the story, and so suddenly it popped into my head, Chris Nolan, this guy I had been thinking about. I just wanted to meet and tell him how much I admired his work, and I went, wow, what a fascinating story for him to tell, because he likes to tell things kind of in a non-linear way. He's very creative. And this is a story that is absolutely ripe for that. It's perfect for that. So I'm just really looking forward to what he does. He's a terrific writer.
Is that the next project?
No, I don't
How
really
far out
know.
You don't know when it'll happen.
Don't really know.
And there it was, official news. The screenplay Nolan began work on for Castle Rock Entertainment was based on Richard Hack's book, Hughes, Private Diaries, Memos and Letters. The book was originally optioned by director William Friedkin. A legal dispute with Warner Brothers over unpaid profits from The Exorcist led to him stepping aside and Nolan handling the property instead. Writer Richard Hack aimed to expose the illusion of Hughes's life and reveal the man behind the myth, alleging Hughes was a man without compassion, an entrepreneur without ethics, an eccentric trapped by his own insanity. The book used newly uncovered personal letters, over 110,000 pages of sealed court testimony, recently declassified FBI files, autopsy reports, and exclusive interviews. The FBI files on the enigmatic Mr. Hughes contains engaging information and documentation on Hughes's business activities in his various enterprises: aircraft manufacturing, trans-world airlines, movie making, and gambling. It's no surprise the story makes for such an enticing character study.
Hughes wasn't always a recluse. For years, he was fascinated with Hollywood, a rich playboy dating a bevy of starlets, Lana Turner, Katharine Hepburn, and Ava Gardner. Hughes signed a personal check for almost $24 million to buy himself the RKO studios. He became a star maker. Jane Russell was a hit in the Hughes picture The Outlaw. It was frowned on because of Russell's famous cleavage. Hughes dubbed Jean Harlow the Platinum Blonde and catapulted her to fame in a film called Hell's Angels. This movie marked the start of his lifelong love affair with aviation. Hughes became a pilot and learned to fly some of the sequences in this film himself. In 1935, he set a cross-country speed record.
Are you going to fly this plane back to the coast?
Not right away, anyway.
Do you intend to break any more records?
I'm not sure.
But he did. In 1938, New Yorkers turned out to hurl 200 tons more ticker tape than they did for Charles Lindbergh after Hughes set a 3-day, 19-hour, and 8-minute round-the-world flying speed record. Hughes always insisted on testing the planes he designed first, although he crashed in his experimental XF-11 in 1946 and almost lost his life. His last venture in aircraft design was his least successful. He built a 200-ton flying boat made of plywood to carry troops overseas, but the plane, called the Spruce Goose, flopped, and Hughes defended the loss of $18 million of government money before a congressional hearing.
Well, Senator, you know very well I not only didn't make anything, I have lost $7,200,000 to date. I put the sweat of my life into this thing. I have my reputation rolled up in it, and I have stated several times that if it's a failure, I'll probably leave this country and never come back, and I mean it.
Hughes insisted he'd make the Spruce Goose fly. He did, once, for about a mile.
Hughes's impact continues to be felt even today, from entertainment to politics, aviation to espionage. The influence and manipulation of this billionaire has left an indelible unique mark on the cultural landscape. Jim Carrey would speak in 2002, saying, "Howard Hughes is somebody I'm interested in. In certain ways, I probably am him. I identify with certain things. I want to find out what made him go where he went. I want to find out what his hole was, what his chasm was that needed to be filled that never could be. It's Citizen Kane to me with characters. It's what they are missing, what they are trying to fill up with their behavior. It's Rosebud. Everybody is trying to find Rosebud, the thing they are missing, but it's in the fire. You have to let it go. It's amazing. The people who don't let that go and realize that they are never going to get that don't go on. They don't grow up." Christopher Nolan gave an interview the following month, saying, "Not a biopic is what I keep saying. I'm working on a script based on the life of Howard Hughes for Jim Carrey to play Howard Hughes. I'm just getting into that in writing, in terms of my imagination of knowing who is going to play the part. It is different sitting down to write, and sitting down to write whilst already knowing who is going to play the part. We have met several times to discuss the specifics of the direction we were going in, and Jim has some fantastic ideas which are close to my ideas. We are having quite a bit of fun. He is just perfect. He was born to play him. He just really is. The film has been discussed to be made for years in various forms, but never has. The casting is one of the things behind that. When you have that, and you hear Jim's take on the characterization, and you look at his extraordinary gift for channeling individuals, like in his portrayal of Andy Kaufman, you can see that Jim Carrey is a very unique talent. What I need is an individual who can play all the unique aspects of the character of Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes is just an astonishing figure. Most people know a little bit about his life, but not that much, which makes him an ideal subject for a film. He embodies so much of the American concern with material wealth and the effect that it may have on you, and how do you deal with extraordinary success and fame. He is an extraordinary individual from that point of view. He has the extremes in which he lived. He was on top of the world and the first real American billionaire, and then he spent decades shut away in small hotels. He's just fascinating. Nolan's comment, "It will have strong connections with the films I've already made," can only lead one to assume that we would have seen a continuation of the themes already explored in all of Nolan's work up until this point. Nolan's camera technique, lens selection, and affinity for film noir sensibility would certainly be a creative asset in telling the story of Hughes's later years. To look back at Christopher Nolan's first student film, from 1997, set within the claustrophobic confines of a shabby London apartment, it sees actor Jeremy Theobald chase around after what appears to be a bug, attempting to squash it with his shoe, only to discover that the creature is in fact a bug-sized version of himself. The year after, Nolan shot the critically acclaimed short, Following. This no-budget, meticulously rehearsed black-and-white thriller concerns the spiraling self-destruction of a paranoid male protagonist. The success and potential of the filmmaker shone through, and critical indie acclaim would afford Nolan a $10 million budget to make Memento. Again, we spend a lot of time with the main character alone by himself in a room, and yet through Nolan's directorial choices, we kaleidoscope through themes of identity, reality, justice, memory, despair, and obsession. We have an emotionally damaged protagonist. As with many of Christopher Nolan's main characters, they have had some kind of traumatic experience or event that has shaped them into the person they have become. Here is Hack on his book launch press tour in September 2001, telling the host who Howard Hughes really was.
Howard Hughes lived the American dream. He was wealthy beyond belief, dated beautiful movie stars, and made record-breaking flights. But the man who could have it all for years just wanted to be left alone. Because of that, much of his life has remained a mystery until now. Author Richard Hack uncovers America's first billionaire in his new book, simply called Hughes. Richard Hack, good morning. Good to see you.
Thank you very much.
You say, I'm fine, thank you. You say this is a different perspective on Howard Hughes because the other books have been written based on stories told by people who knew him. You think this is his point of view. How could that be?
Well, I made the effort to try to get inside his mind. This is you know, he was America's first billionaire, and he was a famous film producer after all. He did, you'll recall, The Outlaw with Jane Russell and the Press, and he won the first Oscar Award for the best comedy film. He also flew around the world setting records. He also bought half of Las Vegas, and he also was America's #1 defense contractor, and he dated all those beautiful women that you know, Katharine Hepburn,
right.
Bette Davis, Lana Turner. But the fact was, this is a man that absolutely was elusive. To everyone who knew him, they knew him differently. So you interview someone, and they will give you a different story each time.
He demanded his privacy. He was obsessive about it, and yet he had the people who work for him keep detailed records of every move he made, from the time he ate to the time he went to the bathroom. Why?
This is the story. He did not have that done. They did it so they could keep track and refer to it, because he was so compulsively controlling that when he would talk to them, they'd have to know exactly what he was talking about. He had an incredible memory.
Did he know they were keeping these records?
No. He did not know they had the records, and when he found out about it, he wanted them all destroyed as they were going. He thought they were destroyed. The fact that they weren't destroyed would have killed him if he hadn't already been dead.
And it's some of those documents that were kept about him that you scoured to write this book.
Over 110,000 pages I rifled through.
You say he was known as a great ladies' man. However, you say perhaps that was a bit of a myth, that he was not all that great a lover. He dated Katharine Hepburn.
Yes, he certainly did. She moved in with him at one point, brought the maid, the butler, and the 3 dogs.
Why did she move out? What happened between the two of them?
Well, she found out that he was dating Bette Davis. That sort of puts a crimp on things, you know, when you think you're the only one. He proposed to all these ladies, mind you.
And then they'd all find out that he had somebody else on the side.
When Ginger Rogers found out, she threw a bag full of jewelry at him, only to learn the next day that he also repossessed her station wagon that he had given her.
We have a photo that I think was the last picture ever taken of Howard Hughes, and the weird thing is it was taken 25 years before he died.
That's right.
Why did he retreat so thoroughly from the public?
Well, for one thing, he didn't have to deal with them. He had so much money that he could lay naked in a bed, blacked out room, talking on the telephone, and do all his business. Everybody else was out there doing it. And on top of that, he was a sociopath. He didn't like people. He didn't like, even his aides, who were the only people he saw, he didn't allow to talk to him.
You talk about the cleanliness issue, the fear of germs.
Yes.
Perhaps a result of the way his mother raised him.
Definitely. She would wash him down with lye soap every morning. She would check his teeth like a horse. She looked in the toilet at his feces to see if there was tapeworms. But mind you, it was a time that there were malaria, typhoid. There were epidemics everywhere, so she was concerned.
Here are the rules for when someone would come into the room where he was staying. This is part of a memo. It says, before opening the door to the room, the man is to stand with a folded newspaper in his right hand, rapidly wave it for at least a minute to eliminate the possibility that flies will enter the room. Using 8 Kleenexes placed in the left hand, the man who's rapidly waving the newspaper will knock on the door. When HRH responds, the man will open the door using the hand with the Kleenex. I mean...
Right, as opposed to the dirty hand. I mean, hello, Howard, you know. The man was a bit compulsive, let's face it, but on the other hand, he was absolutely the most amazing man that America has ever created, ever.
Okay, I have got to interrupt you right now.
Sorry.
Richard Hack, thank you very much. We appreciate the book is called Hughes. We want to go live right now and show you a picture of the World Trade Center, where I understand...
Nolan and Carrey continued to redraft the screenplay, collate ideas, and develop a version for their movie when came the news. Martin Scorsese, who had already worked with Leonardo DiCaprio on Gangs of New York, had received the green light to begin production on The Aviator. With his script already completed, Scorsese and his leading man were now scheduled to start shooting in June 2003. To Nolan and Carrey, this was a devastating blow. the script would now remain on the shelved project stack, and the director and actor were now free to pursue other projects. Nolan would show interest in a potential Warner Brothers reboot of Batman, incorporating shades of Hughes's eccentric billionaire character into the psychologically wounded and eternally vengeful Bruce Wayne.
But one of the things that you were able to use, I think, in the way that you sort of depict characters, especially protagonists, is a self-destructive loner who really has to find a way to integrate himself into a bigger world and often doesn't find the way to do that in your previous movies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I like to joke, I'd been writing a script about Howard Hughes for about a year before I came onto this project, and when Scorsese's movie got going, I decided to find another strange billionaire driven by dark impulses.
Promoting the DVD release of Batman Begins, the director was asked whether or not he considered Bruce Wayne to be a great businessman. Nolan responded, "I see him as being like Howard Hughes, whom I wrote a script about. There's a lot of Howard Hughes in Bruce Wayne. The bottom line on Howard Hughes is that you can read as many books that say he was a brilliant businessman as you can that say he didn't have a clue. At the end of the day, he did extraordinary things with his money in terms of engineering and accomplishment and self-interested direction. And I see Bruce Wayne as a very smart guy who's going to use his money in extraordinary ways."
And taking on Bruce Wayne who's really been in a kind of self-imposed isolation, in a sense, for about 8 years, almost like a Howard Hughes figure. Christian just really tried to approach that characterization from inside and really present the truth of that and what that would be, and it's a fun thing to watch on screen.
In The Dark Knight Rises, the inspiration can be seen quite clearly with Wayne's unkempt beard and long hair, his limp and cane from injury and inactivity. Editor Lee Smith would confirm that Nolan's cancelled Hughes movie did indeed lead to Bruce Wayne's absent years taking on the image of the famous recluse.
And so, at least superficially, we're dealing with a Gotham that doesn't need Batman anymore. On the surface of things, looks much better. And so, you've got a Bruce Wayne who has locked himself away in self-imposed isolation in a wing of Wayne Manor, much in the manner of Howard Hughes in his Las Vegas period. And really, our story picks up with the idea of this is a guy who's, as Alfred said, hung up his cape and his cowl, but he hasn't moved on. He's sort of stuck in this moment in time, or this emotional phase of his life.
The project would disappear off the radar for another 12 years. Film producer Graham Kay would later lament, "The one I regret not getting made was a project that I'd helped set up for Scott Steindorf at Castle Rock Films. It was a brilliant book by Richard Hack about Howard Hughes. I attached Jim Carrey and Christopher Nolan to write and direct, and Christopher had such a great feel for how this movie should be made, and I thought Jim Carrey would be amazing as Howard Hughes. But Miramax ended up making The Aviator to beat out Castle Rock. And the feeling I got after seeing the film was that it was done just to cross the finish line first, and the movie had no soul." All talk of the film had now ceased, and Nolan went on to direct other films. And then, around the time of The Dark Knight Rises, Christopher Nolan would dust off the Howard Hughes script and give it another rewrite after purchasing the rights to Michael Drosnin's Citizen Hughes, the power, the money, and the madness.
I'd love to work in the new, graphic novel versions of the movie. I don't know about reprising the role. I don't think Chris Nolan would go for that, but I'd love to work with him. We actually developed a script for a movie about Howard Hughes. And he says it's one of the best scripts he's ever written. But at the time, Aviator had just, was coming out, and we decided not to do it. He didn't want to come out against Martin Scorsese, who was one of his heroes. So, maybe someday that'll occur, because I'd love to work with Chris.
Nolan was asked at the BAFTA-hosted Q&A about the project.
And Howard Hughes, the script, and,
what
attracted you to Howard?
Well, I don't know how much you know about Howard Hughes, but he's sort of, he's just a fascinating character, and his history is fascinating. And let me put it this way, a lot of what I put into my Howard Hughes script that I do hope to make one day, so I don't want to say too much about it.
Sure.
But a lot of what I found interesting, that character channeled its way to Bruce Wayne very, very easily. Okay. As far as the eccentric billionaire kind of characters go, his history is generally pretty fascinating, and one day I hope to do it, because there are films that have addressed different aspects of the extraordinary life he led, but not the whole thing, right?
The events of Drosnin's book begin in Hughes's later, more troubled years, and Nolan's film would have essentially shown us all of the aspects of Howard Hughes's later life that the Aviator's late 1920s to mid-1940s timeline left out. Drosnin is a former Washington Post and Wall Street Journal reporter who's best known for writing the bestseller The Bible Code, but his Citizen Hughes leans exclusively on some astonishing primary sourcing. Over 3,000 pages of Hughes's own handwritten memoranda, which leaked after the billionaire's office was burglarized in 1975. The material Nolan would base his script on, by Richard Hack, was co-written by Hughes's longtime lieutenant, Robert Bob Mayhew.
It was a very, very tough time for me. Here I had been in 1957 in the Bahamas. He had appointed me as his alter ego. I frankly did not know that Howard Hughes would really understand what alter ego means, but I checked him out on it, and much to my amazement, he did know. He told me that he wanted me to come up with a plan whereby when I spoke, the whole world would know that it is Howard Hughes speaking. He said, I want you, if I'm subpoenaed for a regulatory body, congressional committee, or in a lawsuit, whatever it is, I want you to be in a position to be able to convince them that you are me and that you can answer the questions for me. And that's what we did. We were not good tenants for a hotel. I mean, we didn't gamble, we didn't have big parties, we didn't have big dinners, and they were getting sick and tired of us, and I mean for real. And in about mid-March, I received a phone call from their attorney. He was absolutely furious. And I had never heard him swear before, but he was swearing on the phone. And finally, when he calmed down, I said, Jack, what is bothering you? He said, I'm holding in my hand right now a letter, return receipt requested, to signee only, directed to Howard Hughes at the Desert Inn Hotel's penthouse floor, and it was returned not known at this address. And he says, if the SOB is not there, if he's not there, then let us have our rooms. If he's there, we're going to kick him out bodily in 48 hours. And I knew then that we had pushed the envelope just as far as we could. So I called him and told him about it, and he said, what do you suggest we do? And I said, well, kiddingly at first, I said, if you want a place to sleep, I suggest you buy a hotel. And he said, get started on it right away.
Under the direction of Bob Mayhew, Hughes was taken by stretcher into a service entrance of the Desert Inn, whereupon he and his aides settled into suites on the penthouse floor. Hughes would remain there in almost constant isolation for the next 4 years. He soon overstayed his welcome, as Desert Inn owners sought to regain control of their profitable high-roller suites. Hughes embarked on a spending spree that resulted in the ownership of the Desert Inn, Sands, Castaways, Frontier, Silver Slipper, and Landmark casinos. The state of Nevada made exceptions for its most famous citizen. Hughes was not content with being the biggest in the gaming industry. He also sought to influence government citywide and statewide. Howard Hughes' irrational thought process affected the profitability of his own hotels. Bob Mayhew took on an increasingly powerful and influential role in the Hughes empire. Although he had never met Hughes, he now held the title of head of Hughes Nevada operations.
A key plot in the book, which would have no doubt featured heavily in Nolan's reworking of his own screenplay, was how in 1969 and 1970, years when Hughes was seeking federal approval for airline acquisitions, Bob Mayhew delivered 2 bundles of $50,000 each in cash to Charles G. Bebe Rebozo, a Nixon confidant, as a supposed campaign contribution.
He would be on the phone to me and he'd say, Bob, make sure that you're safe where you are, and I'm as safe as can be here, and I'm so afraid that this building will start rocking. And the night before he'd say, do you think it's worth calling the White House again? Do you think it's worth doing this? And just the few moments before, I mean, he would just get all shook up, really badly.
His penthouse would actually shake just a bit. And nothing else reached him, and that did.
He gave me the assignment of going to Florida and with $1 million in cash to convince President Nixon that he was prepared to put up this amount of money to stop underground testing.
Nixon had accepted money from Hughes before he became president. But this was different. Not even Howard Hughes, with all his wealth, could alter the nuclear policy of the United States. But inside his fantasy world, he still believed he could shape America's political destiny.
There is no more chilling example than what happened on the night that Bobby Kennedy died.
Is there a doctor in the house, please? It's very important. We need a doctor. Is there a doctor? Quiet! All right. Quiet.
And Howard, watching on television, saw the assassination and immediately wrote a memo to his right-hand man, Bob Mayhew. I mean, the opening is chilling. I hate to be quick on the draw, but I see here an opportunity that may not happen again in a lifetime. And he went on to say, I want you to hire the entire Kennedy organization so that we can put my own man in the White House.
Mayhew made secret approaches and put Larry O'Brien, Kennedy's campaign manager, on the Howard Hughes payroll at $15,000 a month. The outcome was ironic in the extreme. When Republican President Richard Nixon sent in his men to burgle O'Brien's office in the Watergate Hotel, their object was to uncover any connection between the Democratic Party and Howard Hughes. The investigation that followed led to Nixon's resignation in August 1974. In trying to buy a government, Hughes had succeeded in toppling a president.
Imagine sitting naked, unwashed, with your hair down to your ass and your fingernails 6 inches long and your toenails longer, in a room covered with filth and debris, and yet managing from that total seclusion, living like the worst lunatic in history, managing nonetheless to control presidents of the United States, to work your will on major corporations, to buy an entire state and run it practically single-handed. No one's ever done anything like that, at least not since Nero, not since the craziest of the Roman emperors, the maddest of the Russian czars. There's never been anything like him in modern times.
Meanwhile, another equally bitter power struggle was developing in the Desert Inn Hotel. As Howard Hughes deteriorated mentally and physically, his executives and minders had gradually become more like his jailers. Now they were fighting amongst themselves for control of his empire. Most of them were Mormons, originally chosen by Hughes for their loyalty.
The aides were in the environs of Hughes 24 hours a day on different shifts. And most of the communications were related through the aides. There were very, very few people who had direct access to Hughes, either by handwritten memo or telephonically.
They would say, well, you know, he can't have any medication until he's signed this paper. Now they would say that, you know, the aides or whoever, they would say that, yeah. And I remember Mel Stewart told me on many occasions, you know, that he was in there, and Mel Stewart was his nurse. I said to him one day, boy, it's like a control. He said, that's the way they control him, Gordon. That's the way they do it, you know.
You had to feel sorry for him. And it's almost, how you felt about King Kong at the end of the movie. You know, he had just trampled hundreds of people and knocked over half of New York. But when he gets shot at the top of the Empire State Building, you bleed with him. You care about him. I think because he was innocent of his own evil. And the same thing about Howard. I don't think he was ever aware of what he was doing.
Nixon was paranoid about being linked to any gift from Hughes because in 1956, Hughes made a controversial $205,000 loan to Nixon's brother, Donald. This is a recording of Richard Nixon and his assistant, John Ehrlichman.
I do feel that we should not try. I just think we have got to, because basically they're throwing stuff at us. We've got to put that out. Well, I think Hughes, if they might bring up that goddamn loan again, I think we ought to break this over O'Brien's head.
Well, I wouldn't wait. I'd kind of like to throw a little bigger. I'm going to get Schultz tomorrow, and got to take us to that. And I'm going to ask him to have the IRS go behind that entry in that report again.
Right.
And call for those returns. Perfectly legitimate thing for them to do. We don't need to appear in the revolt.
No. And it doesn't do it because it's the Hughes thing. But it's under investigation. Not investigation. Why are we investigating Don?
No, they're investigating John Meyer. Investigating a guy named Cleveland. Because when Hughes bought all those mining claims out in Nevada, there was a big kickback. There was about a $9 million kickback, where Hughes actually paid about $9 million more for them than they were worth.
Now, the only problem about throwing the Hughes stuff out is you wonder what the Hughes people are going to say about Don.
Oh, I think we know pretty much everything there is to know about that. And I don't think it's...
Well, the incident, in fact. But anyway, it's an old story.
That's it.
They'd have a hell of a time.
Details of the loan were leaked during the 1960 presidential campaign, and Nixon believed it cost him the election to John F. Kennedy. Watergate burglars attempted to break into the Greenspun safe at the Sun offices to get the Mayhew-Hughes' memos about that gift. They damaged the safe door, but never broke it open. Nixon was also concerned that Mayhew had told one of his former employees, then Democrat National Committee Chairman Larry O'Brien, about the cash donations from Hughes. O'Brien's Watergate offices were broken into, but the burglars were caught, going down in American history.
Hughes stepped up the battle and decided to garner support from whichever candidate would replace outgoing President Lyndon Johnson.
To put all this in true perspective, what happened is that Hughes made a decision on the same day, wrote me a memo telling me that he wanted me to see Richard Nixon as soon as possible and offer him unlimited help with his campaign, because it was very important that he, Richard Nixon, be the next president of the United States. The same day, he sent me another memo saying to go see Hubert Humphrey and offer him unlimited support because it was very important that he be the next president of the United States.
In order to cover all bases, Hughes attempted a last-ditch effort to appeal to President Johnson.
Well, on 2 occasions, he wanted me to offer $1 million to then presidents to try to stop the underground testing. And by that time, I had reached a point in my world with him where I knew that I had to give him the impression that I was doing it for fear that he'd give the assignment to someone who'd be stupid enough to try.
Unfortunately for Nolan and Carrey, on June 20, 2011, Paramount Pictures announced that Warren Beatty would write, direct, and star in a biopic based on Howard Hughes' life. That project had initially been an intended vehicle for Steven Spielberg.
What have you seen that you said this could be? Let's just be speculative. This could be a feature film. Or there's something that I've been noodling around. This is possible.
Well, I mean, it's no secret that I'm interested in a biography on Howard Hughes. He was really just a complete contradiction. He was a movie producer. You know, he was a megalomaniac. He was interested in airplanes. You know, I have a love affair with airplanes ad nauseum, as did Hughes, and there are many different, and also that he became completely reclusive and existed in kind of an inner world. And he was, at one point in his life, for several decades, the most gregarious person, and then the following several decades, the most infamously reclusive personality. that's ever been talked about in American history, or 20th century history, and I just find that very fascinating.
The announcement would persuade Nolan to abandon his reinterpreted Hughes' screenplay. A pet project now put on ice for a second time proved to be a deeply frustrating experience for the director.
The Howard Hughes, it's the favourite of the scripts I've written. So it sort of sits there in a drawer and I get it out between films and read it and think about, okay. And then somebody else always comes along and makes another film about Howard Hughes. So
Jerk Warren Beatty does it.
Well, it goes back in the drawer. You say, okay.
Give another 5 years.
I mean, to be fair, Warren had been looking to do that movie for
20 years, I think.
than I had. So, but I would like to do it one day, but,
When discussing his film, Inception, Nolan referenced his work on the Hughes project, saying, "The underlying philosophy for me, in terms of complexity of the film, has always been that those things that had allowed Memento to succeed with audiences in a very mainstream fashion could be tapped to make a huge-scale movie, and that's the premise on which Inception has been built. I tried to do it with my Howard Hughes project first, and when that wasn't going to fly, I put a lot of that thinking into this, into fusing the scale and entertainment value of a large film with something more. And I really don't want to say challenging for an audience, because I don't think it is. That's just a little different and a little bit of a shift." In 2017, speaking about the Howard Hughes film that never was to the Daily Beast Online, Nolan said, "I was definitely like, darn it. I think it's the best script I've ever written, and I had a really wonderful experience writing it. Yeah, it was a frustrating experience that the other movie got going. Will I revisit it? I have no idea. I wouldn't necessarily rule it out, but I wrote it a long time ago." Here's hoping that Nolan one day has his schedule accommodate the filming of his passion project. He is adamant this wouldn't be a by-the-numbers episodic biopic, but rather Nolan would aim to tell the story through Hughes' eyes, one man alone, his greatest opponent being himself. His deteriorating perception of reality and claustrophobic unhappiness, isolation, fear, insomnia, neurosis, and altered states. Nolan was aiming to convey all of this in a cinematic language that would most certainly lend itself to all manner of in-camera trickery, extreme close-ups, skewed points of view, paranoia-inducing sound effects, and mind-bending visuals to reflect the fractured sense of reality and isolation. Hughes would sink further and further into his self-styled hell, with vultures circling and self-assembled entourage of yes-men, opportunists, thieves, and chancers who now only looked to exploit and prey upon a once iconic, but now deeply damaged and wounded soul. To see this sadder chapter of Mr. Hughes reflected through the filter of Christopher Nolan's direction needs very little selling. Hopefully, somebody at Warner Brothers hands him a blank check, leaves him alone, and just let Nolan do what Nolan does. And we, the audience, in return, would be treated to a potentially engrossing, moving, and intelligent retelling of one of the world's most famous men. Thanks for listening.